How closely can we match our digital files to our film scans? That's a question we're going to try to answer today. And yeah, to do this, I'm going to process some files in Lightroom and all the tools that we have at our disposal there. And then also using a plugin called Dehancer, which is basically a film emulation plugin. And I can already say that it's a lot more powerful. And we're going to be comparing that to some film scans I made myself, which for the same film I also had some scans from Camesita here in Lisbon, which was made on a Fuji Frontier. But to be honest, I wanted a bit more control, and the good thing is like we're going to be comparing positive film, it's because you can see it on the light table and see how it actually looks. So I did try to match that when I did some minor adjustments on the scans. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. And so let's jump right into Lightroom. Okay, now we are here in Lightroom. The first thing I would like to say is that these scans are from Ektachrome, and I kept the border in, so it's a bit easier to tell which is which. This is the Ektachrome one, the first. This one I made using Lightroom tools, and this one using Dehancer. Now these are all a little bit different, but I wanted to get them to a starting place that is somewhat similar, without having to do major tweaks. So this is, all I did was get the output from Dehancer and adjust a little bit of exposure. And here, with this one, I used the classic presets, which is basically a film emulation pack that integrates into Lightroom, or basically it is a preset pack. And I use the Ektachrome, so this one is a little bit dark. And these are always, in my opinion, very contrasty right out of the bat. And then, wait, if you adjust this, I think this is already like pretty similar to how it was before. But I didn't do anything but adjust these. So let's go back. And one thing that I think is quite apparent if we switch between these two, Dehancer and the TCP one, the sharpness in these, even though I already removed some clarity, this one seems a lot more, yeah, I don't want to say clinical, but a little bit. And that's like the one thing that people always complain about digital files and digital photography, that it can look quite digital and clinical. And I think that's the one thing Dehancer solves, without any complaints from my side. So they have this halation and bloom and grain tools, which altogether are very convincing on the detail level. But I'm going to get into that later. And if we look at the colors, yeah, so this one has a bit of motion blur. But in terms of colors, I think it's all quite good, like all of these. This one, the gradation, I think there's still something to be desired. But if we go into this one, here the contrast is a little bit different to how the other one was. And the color, but I think even like that, maybe a bit too much. It's already quite similar to the first one. And yeah, if you want to see how this one looks before, or looked, all I did was exposure, more or less, remove some scratches. Yeah, that's literally it. And so if we move on to the next one, here's the film scan. Again, didn't really do much except exposure. And yeah, so this one doesn't have the motion blur problem. Next time for this, I'm definitely going to use a proper tripod, because this one is still not as sharp as it could be. Anyways, so if we look at the TCP one, also doesn't look bad. Again, with the Lightroom tools that we have, can look a little bit. Now this helps, but still, on the detail level, I much prefer what we get out of Dehancer. Much prefer. But there's a catch. I will. There's actually a way to use both at the same time, and I will also show that in the next part. But first, I think in terms of color, this one really comes close. So this is Dehancer. Let's go and back to the actual film. It's really close. But this one, also not bad. Not bad. The gradation is a bit different, but all of them look amazing. I mean, it's in the end, it's the light, I guess. And but if we say, okay, maybe I would like to do this myself, and I'm going to show you now how to use Dehancer. So the first thing to do is, and that's my experience using Adobe Neutral, especially for emulating slide film, because slide film has a contrast curve that is basically linear, and that's the same for Adobe Neutral. Well, to be fair, actual linear would be like this. Then you would have to adjust the exposure a bit more, but it is basically the same. And then we have to turn off sharpening, very important. Otherwise the grain and the softness, what I was talking about, or like the feel won't be right. Very scientific. And the noise reduction are completely turned off, and basically get the exposure to where you would like it to be. In this case, I raised the exposure and got the blacks a bit down again, because I mean, you can also raise them, but then we get like this really washed out thing, and I'm not sure if Dehancer will be able to crush the shadows the way they should be crushed, because we are emulating slide film here for the sake of being technically correct. So if we go to Dehancer now, yes, copy. So the first thing to do is activate a film profile, Actochrome. So this is the actual scan. Film developer. So here we can adjust a bit of contrast, but I would like it the way it is. Let's leave it like that. Then we have film compression. So this one crushes colors, and especially the highlights a little bit, makes it a bit more uniform, which is something we know a bit more from negative film, in my opinion. So I like to keep to stay away from that. But I think this is a bit more cool and a bit more magenta. So let's go there. Yeah, I think that's quite accurate. Color boost, maybe a little bit. Expand, this is just another contrast. This only just deals with contrast, but this is quite handy. I like to use this. And print, this is as if it was printed, and there's even a limiter in terms of like how dark it can be in terms of like the Dmax on paper. Let's keep this off because we're comparing it to the scans and not to printed film. And this is quite similar to using the tone curve, and you can still adjust the tone curve on the TIFF that you export, so I usually don't use this. And now here is the detail stuff. So this is actually a little bit too much grain. And this is 3550, I find, for Actochrome. If you zoom in here. So the scan is actually sharp. It's just a bit of motion blur again, but the grain is extremely fine. So here, in the midtones, It's actually quite accurate, 35. But in the highlights, it's not, because there's like very, very little grain. So we're going to take some of these out. And then suddenly it looks extremely similar. Yeah. And that's what I mean, is that this is very, very good. And then also one more thing. In Lightroom, we can only have monochromatic grain, which means that it's just a pattern on top of the actual image data. And here it actually has some color, and usually it's something a bit warmer. Don't ask me why that is. I just know that it is not monochromatic, it is chromatic, it has some sort of color. And as you can see, it adds like a little bit of color here and there. And that's just very accurate. Again, big fan of that. And moving on to halation and bloom, I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. Basically, you have all these tools here, and it adds that little bit of extra softness. I mean, you can definitely go above and beyond, like really sinister style. I'm not really a big fan of that. I like it just a little bit. Just like it does here. There's definitely some tiny bits of halation. And yeah, the bloom, same thing, just makes the highlights a little bit softer. And that's something you can't do in Lightroom. That's something you have to do in Photoshop. And to be honest, I couldn't do it like this well in Photoshop. I just don't have the skill and the patience, and I'd much rather use this. So yeah, that's the walkthrough. Very happy with this. I almost prefer it to the actual film now. Yeah, so, but let's look at some examples where we compare. Let's see, just a couple more examples. This is done using Dehancer. Again, the highlights and the blooming and just how natural it feels. Big fan. And this is using the classic presets. Also like the colors and everything. I still enjoy the colors here a bit more, and I didn't do anything to it here. This is just what I tweaked within Dehancer in 2 minutes or like 1 minute. I quite like that. It's not. I also like this, but I prefer also like the way the details are handled. But, and now here comes the catch, you can actually use them together. So if we go here, turn sharpening off, this off, and of course also the grain off. And now let's go into Dehancer. And then normally this would be enabled. Actually having a double actochrome effect I quite like, but let's keep it off. And then we also have to turn all these off, which I already did before. And yeah, then we add the film grain, halation, and bloom. Let's keep it just as they were before. And now we compare the two. Yeah, no, I couldn't tell you which I prefer. And that's the thing. So Dehancer also has like a smaller plugin which only does the detail stuff. So I think that's, in terms of value for money, that one is basically unbeatable. And then the thing is, I like both results. So yeah, here one more. So this one is without the blooming and everything. It just looks a bit softer here. I prefer it. But if you added like the same, if you did the same here, I couldn't tell you which I prefer, I think. And one more thing that I would like to point out, skin tones, and that's a really big one. So here, I think Dehancer, so I found this one a little bit tricky. So this is the Ektachrome TCP without any tweaks. This is Dehancer. It's a bit unfair comparison right now because I did tweak a little bit, but not much. And then comparing to actual film, I think we come relatively close. This one is one of the things I would like to point out. If the lighting conditions aren't ideal, sometimes it struggles, and then you will have to do some post-processing, just getting things right. But you have to do less than you do with the presets here. However, you get all this added control right here. You can really see what's going on, and that's something really nice, especially when you experience banding or something. So that's kind of like the trade-off where you have to go, which do I prefer? I personally enjoy having something like this, just out of the box. But you also have to think about, this is a TIFF. So every time you have to get it into Dehancer, do your tweaks, save it as a TIFF, which is going to be at least 100 megabytes on a 24 megapixel file. I think on like these modern 60 megapixel cameras, must be like almost half a gigabyte, which is a lot. So it's not something you would do just for every shot if you just want to export something quickly or for social media or whatever. But the results, it is a bit more of a powerful tool. You also have to be fair. And I still like to use this stuff here. And yeah, do I prefer the actual film in this case? Absolutely. Maybe the light was also a bit different here, but this was kind of like the most similar thing I could find. So just keep that in mind. And I think when the light gets difficult, because I think these products are all tweaked to really like ideal situations where you feel like this is where you get the best images in general, but sometimes you find something very, very interesting, but the light isn't perfect and you would still want to get like really good results. That's when you actually have to put in a lot of extra work and tweak things, no matter what product you use. I mean, of course, you can also just go from the start and do it yourself. I just like to have a certain starting point that works with my film stuff or whatever. It's just a matter of workflow, and that's just what I would like to point out. And yeah, so skin tones, sometimes difficult, sometimes not under the right conditions. And one last example, so really high contrast, also on Ektachrome. So this is the Chrome, and this is using Dehancer. So here I think it's a bit hard for Dehancer to get everything so similar because of maybe the 14 stops of dynamic range that we get from these files, because this actually doesn't look, even though it's a lot of black, it doesn't look very crunchy. But if you push these like really down to black, it looks a lot more crunchy, also because the lens is even sharper, or like you have the, what I'm getting to. And in certain difficult situations, it's just not as convincing, but I think it's still doing a very good job. The files are never falling apart, and then you could still tweak them as you want them. I mean, the sliders are all at 0, and with the TIFFs, there's a lot you can do. It's not like this is a JPEG or something. So that's one thing I would like to point out. So who's this for? I think Dehancer is costs like 250 euros or something like that. I might be wrong. I think if you compare it to shooting a lot of film, I think the break-even point is like after probably, I don't know, 10 rows or something. So it's actually not that expensive if you consider that. But for a digital shooter, and especially if you don't like the TIFFs, if you like ease of like quick turnaround, maybe it's not ideal. And I think also like the high price is like not for everyone. Do I enjoy using it? Absolutely. Will I continue to use it? Absolutely. I just really like it to get convincing results and also match up my film stuff with my digital stuff. I know a lot of people, when they shoot digital, they just go for a bit more of a custom look or something that's not really as close to film. And I just don't like to reinvent the wheel. To answer the question, how close can we mimic our film shots? I think under the right conditions, pretty well. But if the light gets challenging, and that's kind of like where this comparison is not entirely complete, because you can't always shoot everything side by side. When it gets challenging, you will have to put in some work yourself, especially on this one. Yep, that's it from my side. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you next time.